If you are overvaluing your inventory, you are overstating your profit. Sound counterintuitive, but a lot of companies grow themselves into bankruptcy. Don't be one of them. I would say that manufacturing has a lot more inputs and requires a lot more factors to be considered when doing financial work and analysis. There are a lot of variables that have to be monitored, KPIs that need to be established and followed, and a lot of areas that can give problems that may not apply to most of the other industries. The details, I think we can discuss under various headings, but generally speaking, manufacturing has a capital investment, it has labor involved, it has materials involved, and cash flow becomes very important. So there are a lot of factors playing into it, and I'm referring to B2B mainly. I'm not referring to B2C. So there are smoothing you can do in manufacturing that you can't do where you're just shipping or sitting retail and waiting for somebody to come into the store. There are differences, but costing becomes very important in manufacturing as well. And I think we should discuss each one of these separately as we go through this. So the big factors facing the middle market are really tied to inflationary issues, labor issues. Generally, the market where they're operating, they know, and there is some consistency there. But particularly when it comes to inflation, the manufacturing is really susceptible to any changes immediately. If there are labor increases, it applies immediately. If there are other cost increases, utilities and other benefit programs, they have immediate effect on the costs. So that is an area that needs to be watched very carefully. And the other area, of course, on the labor side is the availability of labor, the training of labor, the cost of hiring labor, and the effects on efficiencies when you are still adding labor that has not been trained yet. There are various ways to try and protect it, but you don't really have an alternative when it comes to the costs. When they occur, they occur. You can have agreements on the material side with your suppliers normally you do, and those can vary from 6 months to annual, where you have the ability to fix your material costs, which are normally the major cost in the total cost of your goods. Labor, you cannot. What happens, and the others can be addressed. Different businesses have different policies with regard to buying from you in terms of your cost changes, and you have to remain competitive. So it is a fine line you walk sometimes. It is very important that you can mitigate inflation and make sure you don't have your margin being eroded through inflation. That can really hurt you in the longer term. I believe costing systems need to be prepared in a fashion that they have the instant recognition of what's going on with your cost structure. But it is important to stay in touch with what's going on in the marketplace and to make sure that costs aren't increasing without you being aware of them. And that's not uncommon. You can have a change in freight costs without it really reaching a senior management level, and items like that start eroding your margin without you even knowing until it's happened. So that is constant. Cash flow is the other big one that we should also cover more fully, and cash flow depends on your whole working capital structure. I would say that we should look at working capital as one of the major items of any manufacturing company, because you're dealing with receivables. When it's B2B, you're dealing with inventory, and you're dealing with payables, as well as making sure that you are always looking at your production capacity and production technology, which would keep you abreast of current technologies out there, and perhaps not be caught by surprise by a competitor who finds a more efficient way of running or a more up-to-date equipment that runs faster. Those are all items that, when you're in manufacturing, are very important. especially for middle market, where you're not really a large company with a big branded name, and you can really set your price and be more secure in pricing on a large scale. I believe that the knowledge and the expertise in the financial area needs to be in a business almost from day one. Unless the founder is very financially wise. That is why I believe the fractional CFO market is in fact one that can be used and should be in fact used from the day you start your business. And a fractional CFO on a, priced for the amount of work they do would be a far less expensive item than a second level controller or somebody in the business who has to really keep everything moving forward on a daily basis and cannot look strategically at the business. So I would say, in fact, the founder should have a fractional CFO at his disposal. It could be in various formats. It could be once a week. It could be on a retainer. It could be per hour if it's not even a full day. But that information as you are building the business, I think is invaluable and would put you ahead of those who are trying to do it without the financial expertise behind them. I mean, the cash flow is a major one from day one. And it always takes time to establish a business. And you see all the time in the, where VC companies and businesses building, more in the public eye, they always talk about the burn rate. It is taking a company a while to, in fact, be profitable. That means you have to have the cash available to do that. And if you're starting from scratch and you start building sales, you have to have the materials. You have to have the capital equipment in place. You have to have the labor in place, like not waiting for the orders, but being available as the orders progress and as you expand. So the cash situation is the most vital from a startup and forever. And middle market companies cannot always get the amount they need, or it is very expensive for them. So it needs to be carefully monitored and managed. Other problems are more involved with benefit programs and other kind of more operational issues, where very often the CFO can be a good sounding board and be a good mentor even for the founder, who normally will have a sales or a product technical knowledge background rather than a financial one. So I mentioned, the three major contributors or partners in working capital. You've got accounts payable, which you can create some flexibility if you have a few really important vendors where you are important to them too, and you can create some flexibility perhaps if you have a bad month or two. You have inventory, and there's a big problem when you're manufacturing to manufacture efficiently and produce inventory on economic runs so that you are not running your equipment less than 80% of your runtime, and so that you're not spending too much time changing over with setups and so on. It's important that you can run economic amounts at a time, and those may create inventory problems. You've got raw materials that have to be available and finished goods that have not shipped yet. So you have to monitor that very carefully to make sure that you're not building inventory, which affects your cash flow very quickly if you're not selling it. And you have to make sure you don't run out of raw materials, which would be more devastating. So inventory management is very much part of cash flow. And of course, the other big item is your credit sales, your accounts receivable. And those, again, there are a lot of implications in how you manage your accounts receivable. We have a whole separate webinar on some of the detail of managing accounts receivable, but you have to be on top of it all the time. You set terms and you make sure through managing it, through having somebody who is calling your larger accounts even before due date to remind them, to show you're on top of it, and to make sure you get paid on time. As soon as your accounts receivable start stretching, and remember that as you expand sales, you're going to have more, which means you are going to have more cash tied up in them, which means also you are going to have higher inventories. So the whole cash flow situation is very delicate in a growing company. If you can find finance without it costing too much and without giving away shares in your company, then it's good to use it. There are available funds for that, like the small business funds available. But those come with a lot of strings, and a lot of planning should go into before you open your doors and before you start spending money into how you're going to manage these functions. So that again is why having a CFO, even on a part-time basis or on a small-time basis, helps a lot in avoiding worrying at night if you're going to have money at the end of the week to pay your staff, which you have to do, and that you pay all the deductions over in time. There are fines and serious consequences if you are not paying the FICA over or the tax deductions over. Those are all part of your must-dos, and it's important that your cash is running properly. It's number one in terms of a planning. And the more you can plan, the better, of course. In a growing business, it's difficult to do budgets far ahead, but what we can do is you need to do a break-even budget, which will tell you at what point your sales make a profit on the business based on the fixed overhead you have and based on the contribution at the margins that the material, labor, and selling price creates. And those are important to have budgeted properly. Cash flow needs to go out as far as you can, but at the same time, as I say, the manufacturing sector, until you're on a kind of a stable course, it's very difficult. Once you are on a stable course and your sales are increasing at a regular cadence, your budgeting, planning, and cash flow becomes much more accurate and much easier to manage. And if you see a problem coming, you can talk to your bank up front. Your financial support can talk to the bank. And the biggest issue there is credibility. And to get a banking relationship going even long before you may need it, and keep your bank involved in how you progress, so that if there is a hiccup, which you know you can overcome, your bank is far more likely to help you through that if you are giving them budgeting, planning, cash flow, and at the same time explaining where things may not be perfect. Growing too quickly then is a huge issue, and that some companies don't make it to the other side. So it is important that you grow within your means. Means are both workforce and cash. And there are other balancing things that within the company that have to be set up. You've got to have the capacity without being too much. It's a fine balancing act, developing and growing a mid-sized business. And quite honestly, I think an owner or founder running the business has a lot on his mind, and that is why I feel that a fractional CFO is important from day one and until the company, in fact, can support and afford a full-time real CFO. Costing is one of the real places where business fail. They say small businesses, generally speaking, do not know the real cost per unit of what they're making, because that is a higher level of expertise required. And as we know, a lot of smaller owners, mid-size even, will not have a full-time qualified CFO to cover this. If you don't know your actual cost of goods, you have no idea whether you're making a profit or not. And it only comes back really when suddenly your cash flow becomes an issue, when you think you're making enough in terms of your sales. So I have particular opinions on it. My costing experience covers quite a few areas in business, from manufacturing to converting and fabrication. And they all have little nuances and little differences. But, standard costing has been very popular over the years. And I must tell you that I do not approve of standard costing. Standard costing puts the various costs in a standard into your costing system, and you think this is what the total cost is, and you cost your selling price out with a margin that you know you need based on your break even. The monthly accounts come out and you've got your standard cost, and then you've got variances. And then you have to start analyzing the variances and understanding the variances. And that then absorbs a lot of time before you come to the answer. And before you know it, you're 2-3 months into selling at the wrong price. There are some work that has to be done when using an actual costing system. Most of that is within a good ERP system and available to you. It's not manual. But I believe in an actual costing system so that you know what it's costing you every time you run it. The actual labor, the actual material, based on what you paid for that material, based on what you are paying the labor. And then you have and it takes into account, of course, the overheads, and some can change. And those may be not monthly, but annual overheads should be allocated monthly, not hit in 1 month and give everybody, a minor heart attack. So I really believe in actual costing and taking your labor, your materials, and adding your direct factory overhead or production overhead, whatever you use, adding that on for your inventory calculation. Now, that's another very important aspect. How are you valuing your inventory, which must come from your costing one way or another? If it comes from your bill of materials, which is normally your costing record, I believe in using quarterly updated pricing, and that will give a much better reflection of your real costs for your inventory purposes. And if you are overvaluing your inventory, you are overstating your profit. And that has a double-edged effect. Not only you're thinking you're making money you're not making, but you may have to pay tax on money you're not making. So it's critical not to overvalue your inventory. Undervalue is always safer. It can have a little cushion on your profits as you present it, and it certainly, of course, is not taxable at the lower tax. You don't have the extra profit to be taxed on. Those are two big issues. Inventory valuation cannot be changed regularly because it becomes a big issue for tax. So you have to set the policy. The main area where it becomes an issue on inventory is the valuation of the inventory and the use of the inventory. And a good system, you need to use FIFO, first in, first out, so that you really are calibrating your cost of what you're making to the goods you should be using, the material, the oldest material. And the best way is if you layer your raw material and your finished goods inventory pricing, should I say, based on the cost when it was made or based on the material when it was bought. So you may have an average material cost in the system, but you also have your first in, first out cost. Now, costing also, of course, besides inventory and besides knowing how profitable you are, costing is used very much for your selling price. For selling price, standard is even worse because for selling price, you really, if material is a major cost, you should be using the pricing you're going to pay for your next order. That's a firm price. You know you're going to pay it, and that is what you should be using for your calculations for selling price and for establishing the right margins. And so that should be borne in mind. And if there are any labor agreement changes or any other changes that are coming ahead based on the budget and based on the other negotiations and pricing and whatever, you need to use those for future pricing calculations. Very important. And standard cost cannot do that for you. So your margin starts going out of whack, and it's not a cost problem, it's a selling price problem. I really believe in maintaining your margin based on what your budget and your plan says makes you the money you want to make. And if your net profit is 10%, 12%, 7%, whatever it is, you can see how small percentages affect that much more. Directly to the bottom line is a big effect on your profits. Some are fortunate enough could make 20%, but even then, 2% is 10% of your profit gone. So the way you control your gross margin, knowing your material, your labor, and your factory cost, which are probably mostly direct labor costs and benefits, and those don't change other than by your headcount, mainly from year to year. So those can be managed tightly, and you should have a very constant margin. You can have different margins for different products. Those, again, need to be set based on a proper budget, a break-even budget, and a progressive profit budget. And it is so important in manufacturing to manage and control those by product, by SKU, because each one will be slightly different. And you manage it on a constant basis. And you are looking at your daily and weekly production runs for efficiency. Efficiency is an enormously attractive way to improve your bottom line. And there are many ways to improve efficiency. Many manufacturing companies buy equipment, install them and run. And with experienced supervisors and production managers and operators, they find ways to improve efficiency along the road. And those all become straight to the bottom line. I cannot express the importance of watching your efficiency, production capacity, production output, labor to your production, and any waste and other factors that detract from the profitability. You manage your gross margin, and you'll be much better off. Labor is normally a small percentage of the total cost, but a vital percentage. And if labor goes out, and if you budget 5 and suddenly you're running 7%, that is a huge change, especially if you're running 10% total margin. So the way you manage your labor is vital. And there are a number of aspects to labor in terms of manufacturing. There's proper training, there's safety, and there's quality. Those are all not directly related to what they're doing every hour of the day, but those are the most important factors that they need to understand every hour of the day while they're running the machine. Safety can be very expensive. Your workers' comp insurance goes up if you have accidents. OSHA comes in. If you're not applying all the necessary safeguards, fines can result. So a safety program, to me, in manufacturing is important as any other in the direct manufacturing process. And also with quality. I've seen situations where a company moved to a new, bigger plant. They install a machine that can run 24/7, extruding low-density polyethylene, and they immediately set up a 24/7 shift program and started running. They didn't have supervision 24/7. Senior management weren't there and before they knew it, they had more seconds in inventory than firsts. They were getting into the seconds business, which is not a very good business, because they ran into 24/7 before they were ready, before the staffing structure was in place from top to bottom. And I emphasize the importance of proper training. Give everybody who comes in time to learn your processes and then become a valuable member of the staff. Some companies use temp labor for flexible reasons where they may not need everybody every day. And again, keep the flexible part to the minimum, because temp labor comes and goes. Temp labor does not get the full training. Temp labor can cause you enormous inefficiencies. It sometimes is better than having people sitting doing nothing, but sometimes the costs can exceed that. It's another area that must be managed closely, and especially if you're dealing with contract labor as a bigger part of your business, because contract labor come with certain what you must do's and can't do's in terms of how they will supply you and the training. And it's an area, labor, that needs close monitoring, close management. You want your labor, all employees at every level, to feel wanted, to feel that they're participating, and to feel that they're making a contribution. I would always, not instruct, but recommend that owners and senior managers walk your manufacturing facility, get to know the people, get to know something about the people, and they will feel as part of your family, and they will then produce at a much greater level and take it more seriously. Those are really the items in manufacturing that labor plays such a big role and is so important. The raw material supply chain can be very complicated. It depends what you're buying, from whom, and where they're located. Certainly, if you're importing any kind of materials, it does require extra inventory, and it may require minimums that may last longer. But I would rather not running out and paying for a little higher inventory than running out and not being able to run at all. So even in that scenario, there are times when the costs of importing jump around. We've seen it here around about the pandemic times with the big changes in ocean freight, the situation where a 40-foot container from China cost $3,500 one day, and within 2 months it was $20,000. That is huge. Now, if you're bringing in valuable goods, of course, it gets spread over much larger volume of dollar amounts and is not so serious. But if you're bringing in cheap items, the increases in freight can hurt you. There's no ultimate answer that covers everything, but a little extra in terms of how much you buy and how much you keep on imported items would be very helpful. In terms of local, of course, the diesel price also went all over the show and got pretty high at times. And I found vendors to us were doing surcharges on the going rate. So you have your relationships, especially on less than truckload quantities, where you're paying a published rate less a discount. And when there is a problem with diesel and the costs go up, they add a surcharge. They don't touch the rates. They add a surcharge. And it can be quite heavy, like 25%. And depending again on what you are transporting, the value versus the volume. If you're buying foam, there's very little foam in a truck. It's a lot of air. And, air doesn't cost anything in the foam. It's cheap. So your freight cost is high on a per unit basis. But if you're transporting wood products, wood is heavy. It'll fill the weight requirement before the volume requirement in a container. So these are issues that affect your freight, and sometimes freight plays a bigger part than anybody thought it could. So it's something to be aware of, to follow. And if you have to pay surcharges, I was able to get our customers to pay surcharges. They understand it the same way you do. You're not changing the selling price. You are adjusting because of the freight involved in getting their raw materials or in shipping to them if you're paying that as well. So you could have surcharge in and surcharge out. Other than that, the level of inventory is important, and having more than one supplier is the other area where you can protect yourself. If something happens to a supplier, even if they're a major portion, have a second supplier that you know has the capacity to fill in. Keep them involved, even if it's a small amount. Don't only go to them, the old story about you go to the banker when you need a rain umbrella and they're not available. They don't have umbrellas. You can only go to them when they know you already and there's no rain. And then they will help you with an umbrella. Well, it's the same with the supplier. If you're not using him and he's number 2 and all of a sudden you have a crunch, he's going to take advantage of that crunch because he's not part of your regular supplier chain. So those are also issues that you need to take into account. Cheapest is always not the best. I've had a lot of procurement experience along the way, and I've always tried to have policies with my major vendors that I don't have to be the cheapest, but don't sell to any competitor of mine at a lower price than you sell to me. And I think that is a very fair way of dealing with it. And sometimes they will respond even more and give you a better price because they see you're not trying to take too much advantage of your situation. So some of those issues can be discussed at negotiating tables. What happens if? What do I do if? And how do I make sure that I can still run the plant next week if a vendor collapses, if freight goes through the roof, if there's some kind of every few years the Long Island, Long Beach is the largest port in the country, and every few years they have a new contract, unionized, and they go on strike for a few weeks. And the ships just stand waiting out in the bay there, building a huge backlog. And that affects when you get the goods. It affects what it'll cost you to get the goods. It doesn't matter if it's road or rail. Sometime there's nothing and all of a sudden there's too much. The result is you wait and you pay more. So these are all the factors, that influence how you deal with materials and how you work with some of the ways to help you out. I don't know if everybody is familiar with sales and operation planning. Some talk about it, but never do it really. What it is a monthly at least meeting with sales and with production and with finance to discuss last month's performance and next month's performance based on expected sales and how production can fit in those expected sales and keep the inventories at where you wish them to be. It's very powerful. It's matching up manpower, capacity, and sales and evening it out and smoothing it out. And it gives you opportunity sometimes. If sales are a little lower, you don't drop your production, but you put into inventory something that may go up next month or the month after in terms of your sales cycle. But it gives you the live, real data to plan ahead with the key components. And you discuss in those meetings where what you expected to happen did not happen. Certainly on production you need to, because if it's a drop in efficiency, it's an increase in your cost. Make no mistake about it. If you make less with the same cost, your cost per unit goes up. If it's in terms of sales, was it a blip? What was the cause? Who were the customers? Why? What will happen next month? Be fully aware. And it's a wonderful way of improving teamwork and collaboration within the company. And very few companies use it successfully. It needs to be measured. Were we 80%? Were we 90%? Were we 110? Why were we 50 on this item? It is very powerful if used correctly and accurately. CapEx has a number of areas besides the pure cost, which whatever it is, you depreciate it over 7 years and you cost it into your product. That's the easiest part of it. But you need the cash flow, or you need the borrowing capacity at a level that you can service. Some people forget, they are smaller companies, they go out and borrow money. And then at the end of the next month, there's an interest bill. They say, oh my God, my cash flow didn't cover that interest bill. What am I going to do? Those are vital parts of management, of CapEx and of cash flow. So it's if you have to borrow, if you've got a lease or a delayed purchase agreement, it adds to your cash flow requirement every month. Build it in so you know you can handle it. Again, if you're buying new equipment, we were in a business that was actually in automotive parts, small parts, and we had maybe 6 or 7 different types of operations requiring different equipment in the plant. And some of it we ran 2 shifts, a couple only 1 shift, 2 of them 3 shifts. So I tried always to push the 1 shift and 2 shift items. If it comes to pushing, you want to sell more and more of the 3 shift, you're going to have to buy something or not take the order or improve efficiency. So you're already pushed into a corner, and you've got to be aware of that coming down the pike. If you're at 80% on equipment, you know that you're going to land up extending your delivery times. Rather try and push sales into other areas. A new piece of equipment, you're going to start off, running 20%, 30%. It's going to be a while before that new equipment is paying its way. And you've got the labor. It's not only the equipment you're spending, you've got labor to run it, trained on it. So CapEx has a lot of different evaluations as to whether you spend the money or not. Yes, you want to grow, but you have to do it in steps. And you don't go to the next level on your step ladder until you know you can cover your costs within, let's say, 3 months. And immediately you adjust all your cash flow requirements based on that you know what you're coming to. If you have an area 45 days from now when you're going to have a problem, immediately you go to the bank. Here's what we want to do. This is why we want to do it. This is what it's going to cost. Here's when we are going to start covering our cash flow on it. They're a whole different ballgame than going to them and saying, we messed up. We don't know what's going on. We don't know how we're going to fix it. And your bank says, well, pal, we can't justify increasing or delaying repayments based on what we're told. So grow within your cash resources, number 1 on the CapEx. Make sure you're getting the latest equipment. Equipment does age. Efficiencies do improve. Times do change. You can be priced out of your finished goods eventually if your equipment is too old. Then make the right decisions at the right time and find ways to get there. But it's normally set up once a year so that you can do all your cash flows without getting stuck in a crisis. But sometimes CapEx can hit you all of a sudden. You're expanding faster. But there's that old tale that more companies fail when they start out because of cash flow than anything else. Nobody wants to be in business for 6 months and then find he needs a partner. He has to give up equity on his brilliant idea, on what he wanted to create. Or worse, even go to a larger financial partner who will push and push, because as you grow, they get more and more until you're a minor shareholder. That's not uncommon. Or It's important to stay within your ability to grow. Sound counterintuitive, but a lot of companies grow themselves into bankruptcy. Don't be one of them. Certainly not because of CapEx. There are a lot more touch points and factors that you have to look at and take into account. They're the obvious ones, but there are added items in them, like the way cash flow runs. And if you're buying, you don't want to buy where the working capital is at a level that before you turn around, you're adding more working capital because of the seasonality or because of unusually low inventory when you bought it, or things that brought down the working capital net amount. You need to be careful because it may go back up and then you're adding cash, number one. Then you have to look very closely at margin management in manufacturing. I stressed it earlier. You've got to look at the history and you've got to look at the current and looking forward. What are the future purchase orders at? What costing are they using for the future purchase orders? Does it align with some of the issues with standard costing? Are they using raw material costs that are not current? The Q of E is much more complicated. That quality of earnings audit or analysis is much more complicated when you're dealing with inputs that are changing in terms of what they cost. It's important. You can't buy a business based on standard costing projections, and you want 2 or 3 years future, right? And you want to see what the sales, how much of the sales are recurring, how much of them are once off. You're looking at issues that manufacturing relies on more and that the profits on manufacturing rely on. You've got labor issues. Have you ever had any lawsuits? Harassment, workers' comp claims, the safety record. Those are all issues that can affect your future performance if you're a buyer. Obviously, if you're a seller, there's nothing much you can do about it, other than if you have some issues today, work on improving them and delay any sale. Unless you have to sell today, tomorrow always is better. It gives you time to make corrections, to improve processes, and to show a professionally run business. So it's important both sides, but buying is the more complicated one, of course. Selling, if you don't want to do it, you'll just get a lower price. There's no long-term forfeiture other than you sold your business for less. But buying, you can get into trouble if you are not covering these. Are the management structure in the manufacturing environment, is it working? Are they good supervisors? Is the relationship on the factory floor positive? If it's unionized, you have another whole problem. I've never worked in a union plant, so I can't tell you all the problems, but there are many. But in a regular, non-unionized plant, you want to know that when you buy it and the owner walks out, you've got a structure there and you've got a staffing there that will work well together and work in your interests. If you have a problem suddenly, it's impossible to recover quickly. And I've seen situations, I've read about them, where a whole workforce took advantage of a situation and it cost the buyer a lot of money. So, because, there may have been some general comment about how well the seller did, and they got nothing of it. So there are a lot of situations there which are more intense in manufacturing than in other environments. So we've dealt with costing. You've got to watch your inventory management in terms of price. I explained to you the different inventory values using different costing methods. Obviously, as a buyer, you want the lowest one you can find, but you don't want to get caught by a high one, where the first sale you do isn't at the 40% margin you expected, but only at 30. Then it's too late. You got caught. So the amount of work on labor and the amount of work on inventory are two of the most involved. Any product liability suits need to be checked out. I mean, always all lawsuits need to be checked out when you're buying, but more so in this situation. It's not uncommon on a buy side not to buy the company, just to buy the assets. It's much cleaner. You don't worry about liabilities and you don't worry about unknown liabilities or potential liabilities. It's clean and it works better. You can't always get that. A seller may not be interested in that, but it's something to bear in mind in terms of manufacturing. And capacity, they give you a budget going forward that shows 10% a year, which would be a very nice level to be at. And after 18 months, the machinery is all at capacity. In fact, capacity is blown. If a machine goes down for maintenance, you're not going to supply. So it's vital that that is taken into account. The capacity utilized at the time you buy and how much it will go up in terms of the projected sales revenue you want to achieve. If it requires additional investment in CapEx, it somehow should be brought into your calculations. Perhaps a certain number that gets deducted, perhaps a workout agreement where if the seller is convinced it's going to work and that you won't have any problems, you put in a workout, 2 or 3 year workout agreement. If we make X per what you think, you get paid the X. If you make less than X, you get paid less than X on that portion of the purchase price. So those are all the issues on manufacturing companies that are not necessarily applicable to all parts of the whole business environment. If the separate product or separate division has a totally separate P&L and balance sheet, no problem. And large conglomerates that sell off companies that have become outside of their core business probably have all that, and you won't have a problem. I was faced with a situation that our company wanted to sell a third of the business. Not a small number. It was over $13 million a year, but we only had one general ledger. We had the same people in the warehouse servicing both parts of the business. So we did our own calculations, 20% of this guy, 30% of the warehouse rent, etc., etc. You can't use that in a quality of earnings audit with the buyer. It's not going to work. So you have to do it differently. Ideally, is what we did. We already decided to move the business that was staying into a new facility. We built a new facility and we started moving it in. And we were already on the road to selling the part that was staying in the old building that we were selling. But I had to delay the Q of E, the quality of earnings discussion, until we'd separated them entirely, until we knew exactly what we needed to run the business they were buying and what we therefore was running with the business we were keeping. So that involved delays. And when we had 3 months worth of the new numbers based on the actual management running that business, which also gives them a very good feeling about buying a business with a management structure that works, with a management that you don't have to start adding to at day one. I think the only person they wanted to add to was a CFO. So it helped a lot. But at the same time, once we could show them the carved out general ledger and the exact percentages, and we showed them a very steady gross margin, the rest was easy. Putting the other numbers together on a percentage basis was totally acceptable to the audit quality of earnings buyer people. And it was a big audit firm. It wasn't a small firm. And they were happy with what we did. But putting percentages in and half of people and a third of people cannot work. And a $30 million business will be managed differently from part of $100 or $150 million business. It will be different. And we let a whole layer of middle management go between the two companies after separation and raised the way we ran other parts. And it worked out very well. So carve-outs are achievable. They do take a lot more work, and you've just heard. I haven't got an easy solution if you remain in the same building, because it means you've got to separate people or attribute salaries to people who are going to have to function in the new company on its own and who weren't doing that before. And it's going to lower the total estimate for sure, because the buyer is taking on more risk, that your calculations will be true, or it may increase perhaps holdbacks and increase payouts based on performance. But nobody's going to pay for the risk of redoing a management structure because it was tied in with someone else. So that's important to know, and that's something. It was a very good experience for me at the time, and it taught me quite a few lessons about how we can do best if we're selling that type of situation.